Sometimes the biggest shift in your life comes from the smallest decision, choosing to remove someone's energy from your space. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. When someone's presence keeps you stuck, drained, or doubting yourself, letting go becomes an act of growth. Your future isn't built in the shadows of who hurt you. It's built in the light you create when you finally step away. Life changes in ways you don't expect the moment you remove what has been silently shrinking you. We often hold on to people not because they elevate us, but because they feel familiar. Familiarity can feel safe, even when it slowly chips away at your confidence, your peace, and your sense of self. When someone's energy drains you, you start living smaller without even realizing it. You make excuses for their behavior. You adjust your boundaries to fit their comfort. You silence your needs to maintain the connection. But deep down, a part of you knows this isn't how love is supposed to feel. The moment you choose to delete that energy, something powerful happens. You expand. Deleting someone's energy isn't dramatic. It's not slamming doors or grand speeches. It's choosing yourself in the quiet ways that matter. It's unfollowing him not to hurt him, but to stop hurting yourself. It's removing his number so you're not tempted to reach out in a moment of weakness. It's distancing yourself from the people and places that keep the connection alive. It's reclaiming the emotional space that was once overcrowded with confusion, mixed signals, and half-effort affection. And once you make that choice, your life begins to open in ways you weren't able to see before. People underestimate how much emotional clutter blocks the good things that are meant for them. When someone with draining energy is in your life, they take up room where joy could be, where ambition could thrive, where new love could enter. Their shadow dims your vision and your potential. You start living through their moods, their inconsistencies, their lack of effort. You find yourself waiting for them to change, waiting for a message, waiting for a sign they care. That kind of waiting keeps you stuck in a chapter that ended long before you admitted it. But when you delete that energy, you stop waiting and start living. You start feeling lighter, clearer, more connected to yourself. You rediscover pieces of who you were before the emotional exhaustion, your curiosity, your independence, your sparkle. You begin to notice things you didn't have the bandwidth to see, opportunities, friendships, dreams, and passions that had been quietly calling your name. The space that his energy once occupied becomes fertile ground for growth. The beautiful part is that your expansion isn't always visible at first. It starts internally. You start listening to your intuition again. You start trusting your decisions. You start honoring your boundaries without guilt. You start waking up without the emotional heaviness that once lived in your chest. And slowly, your outer world begins to reflect your inner world. You attract better conversations. You invest in your goals with more excitement. You surround yourself with people who pour into you instead of draining you. Deleting his energy is not about erasing a person. It's about removing the impact they had on you so you can rise into the version of yourself you were always meant to become. You're not losing anything. You're regaining everything you put on pause while trying to make it work with someone who wasn't aligned with your future. His absence creates the space for your expansion, and once you step into that growth, you'll wonder why you ever allowed yourself to shrink in the first place. There comes a moment when you realize that holding on to someone's energy is costing you more than losing them ever would. It's a quiet realization, not dramatic, not loud, but it hits deeper than any heartbreak itself. You begin to see how his presence lingered long after he left, not because he deserved space in your life, but because you kept giving it to him through your thoughts, your emotions, your memories. And the real turning point is understanding that deleting his energy isn't about pretending he never existed. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that got tangled in him. You start to notice how your mind automatically drifts back to old conversations, old moments, old patterns where you felt small or unseen. These aren't romantic memories, they're mental loops, and every loop drains your energy in a way that slows down your future. So the first step becomes awareness, catching yourself when you slip into the past and gently pulling yourself back into the present. Not shaming yourself, not rushing healing, but recognizing that your energy is valuable and you can choose where it goes. Then something powerful happens. You start taking back emotional ownership. You stop waiting for closure because closure doesn't come from them, it comes from you deciding that the story is over. You stop replaying what he did or didn't do, because those scenes are chapters you've already lived, not ones you need to relive. You begin shifting your focus from what went wrong to what do I deserve next. This is where your strength grows, in the quiet decision to redirect your energy toward your own life, your own goals, your own peace. And as you withdraw emotional investment, you slowly burn the bridges that kept his shadow connected to your future. You start saying no to the urge to check his social media, no to the desire to compare yourself to his new distractions, no to the idea that losing him is some kind of failure. Instead, you say yes to rebuilding your self-worth, yes to showing up for yourself, and yes to seeing your value without needing it mirrored back by someone who never appreciated it. Deleting his energy also means you stop explaining yourself, even to yourself. You stop rationalizing his behavior, stop trying to make sense of what made no sense, stop taking responsibility for someone who never took responsibility for you. You let things be what they were, a lesson, not a life sentence. You allow yourself to feel the disappointment without letting it define you. And slowly, the emotional knots loosen, the heaviness lifts, the craving for his attention fades because you stop feeding it. You realize that emotional detachment isn't cold-hearted, it's self-respect. It's choosing peace over patterns, clarity over confusion, and your future over his memory. Eventually, you wake up one day and notice the shift, not a dramatic moment, just a quiet internal peace. His energy doesn't pull you anymore, his actions don't shake you, his absence doesn't sting, because now your energy belongs to your healing, your growth, and the life you're building. And that's the beauty of deleting someone's energy. You don't lose anything important. You simply make space for the life, love, and joy that were meant for you all along. There's a version of you that existed when he was in your life, a version that tolerated things you never deserved, accepted emotions that were too heavy, and tried too hard to make something work that was never meant to. And then there's the version of you that emerges when you finally step out of his shadow. This shift isn't instant. It doesn't happen just because you decide to let go. It happens because you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself you had abandoned for him. You start by noticing how much of your identity was shaped by trying to be enough for someone who didn't even value what you naturally are. Maybe you softened your voice. Maybe you ignored your intuition. Maybe you lowered your standards, believing that love meant sacrificing pieces of yourself. But when you delete his energy, you stop shrinking to fit his world and start expanding back into your own. And that expansion is powerful. There's a quiet rebirth that happens when his influence fades from your emotional system. You stop carrying his opinions like truth. You stop judging yourself through his lens. You stop believing that his inability to appreciate you says anything about your worth. It's like your mind gets clearer, your confidence starts to reroute itself, and you begin trusting yourself in ways you hadn't in a long time. You realize how much mental space he occupied, not because he was special, but because you were loyal to the potential you saw. Once his energy is gone, you stop chasing potential and start investing in reality, your reality. The reality where you matter, where your needs matter, where your emotional well-being becomes the foundation instead of an afterthought. And as you reconnect with yourself, you start noticing things you missed. You remember that you're capable, loving, intuitive, sensitive in the best way, and strong in ways he never understood. You realize you weren't too much. You were too much for someone who had too little to offer. You weren't hard to love. You just loved someone who wasn't emotionally equipped to receive it. You weren't clingy. You were trying to repair emotional cracks he kept creating. When his energy is deleted, you stop blaming yourself for the weight he added to your life. Instead, you begin appreciating yourself for carrying it as long as you did. This rediscovery also changes the way you move forward. You become less available to people who drain you. You stop entertaining conversations that lead nowhere. You don't settle for half effort or half love. You protect your energy because you finally understand how expensive it is. And you start setting boundaries, not as walls to keep people out, but as filters to ensure the right energy gets in. You become more intentional about who you allow close. You become more aware of what you deserve and less tolerant of anything that feels like the past. And perhaps the most beautiful part of reclaiming yourself is that you begin dreaming again. You start imagining a future that feels light, safe, loving, and aligned with who you actually are, not who you had to be to hold on to him. You begin reconnecting with passions, goals, and desires you had put on pause. You start enjoying your own company in a way you forgot you could. You laugh more genuinely, breathe more freely, and move through your days with a renewed sense of emotional strength. Deleting his energy isn't just about removing someone from your life. It's about returning to yourself fully and unapologetically. And when you do, you realize the truth. You never needed him to become whole. You just needed to let him go to remember that you already were. One of the most powerful shifts you experience when you delete his energy is the moment you stop negotiating your boundaries just to keep someone in your life. You realize how often you bent your own rules, softened your standards, or ignored the things that made you uncomfortable simply because you didn't want to lose him. You weren't weak, you were hopeful. You believed that if you loved hard enough, were patient enough, or understanding enough, he would eventually meet you where you stood. But when someone keeps taking from you without giving back, your boundaries start eroding, and you don't even see it happening. You wake up one day and realize you're living in a version of yourself that doesn't even feel like you, quieter, dimmer, more cautious. And that's when you know something has to change. When you delete his energy, you start enforcing boundaries not as a reaction to him, but as a commitment to yourself. You begin understanding that boundaries aren't about pushing people away, they're about protecting the parts of you that matter. You start saying no without guilt. You start recognizing the early signs of emotional imbalance. You stop letting people overstay in your life just because you care about them. Instead, you begin choosing who earns a place based on how they treat you, not how much you wish they would. And that shift is monumental because it puts you back in the driver's seat of your emotional world. You also realize that boundaries are not just about what you won't accept, they are about what you will accept. You begin setting standards for how you want to be spoken to, cared for, respected, and supported. You become clearer about your emotional limits. And as you do, you start noticing how much more peaceful your life becomes. People who drain you naturally fall away. People who confuse you lose access. People who can't meet your level stop getting chances they didn't deserve in the first place. You begin choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, self-worth over attachment, and the more you choose it, the easier it becomes. What's interesting is that when you build stronger boundaries, you also start healing parts of you that tolerated the wrong things. You learn to trust yourself again, your intuition, your emotional signals, your inner voice. You start listening to the discomfort you used to silence. You stop second guessing your feelings. You give weight to your own needs without apologizing for them. And that strengthens your sense of identity in a way that makes it impossible for someone like him to ever take advantage of you again. You're no longer afraid of losing people. You're more afraid of losing yourself, and that's a sign of real growth. As your boundaries strengthen, your relationships improve too, not just romantic ones, friendships, family dynamics, work relationships. Because the truth is, when you start valuing your energy, everyone around you learns how to value it as well. You command a different level of respect, not because you're demanding or harsh, but because you no longer accept the bare minimum. This makes the right people feel more secure with you because they see your strength and your clarity. The wrong people, however, begin to feel uncomfortable not because you changed, but because they can no longer benefit from the version of you who lacked boundaries. Deleting his energy teaches you that boundaries are a form of self-love. It reminds you that protecting your peace is a non-negotiable part of your future. And the more you hold on to that truth, the more your life starts aligning with the kind of relationships you actually deserve. Steady, respectful, mutual, and honest. You stop allowing shadows from the past to dictate your future. You stop giving emotional discounts to people who never paid full price for your heart. And as your boundaries solidify, you finally become someone he could never access again, not because you're cold, but because you've grown beyond the version of yourself who once allowed him in. There comes a stage in your healing where you stop chasing answers and start accepting truth. For so long, you might have carried questions in your chest like emotional weight. Why did he treat me like that? Why wasn't I enough? How could someone who said he cared act so casually with my heart? You replayed moments, looked for clues, tried to decode behaviors that were inconsistent, confusing, or emotionally careless. But when you delete his energy, you realize that the answers you've been hunting for don't actually change anything. They don't heal you, they don't bring peace, they don't rewrite what happened. They simply keep you tied to a story that no longer serves you. And that's when acceptance begins, not the weak kind, but the kind that frees you. Acceptance doesn't mean what he did was okay. It doesn't mean you deserved it, or that your feelings were dramatic, or that you should have known better. Acceptance simply means you stop negotiating with reality, you stop rewriting the past to make it less painful. You stop making excuses for someone's lack of emotional capacity. You no longer personalize his shortcomings or interpret his behavior as a reflection of your worth. Instead, you acknowledge the truth. His actions came from his own wounds, his own ego, his own confusion, and his own limitations. They were never about you. They were simply expressed through you because you were close enough to feel the impact. This kind of acceptance is powerful because it allows you to shift from blame to understanding. You begin to see how deeply you cared, how willing you were to show up, how much love you tried to give. Those were not weaknesses, they were qualities, but they were given to the wrong person, someone who didn't know what to do with them. And when you finally accept that not emotionally, but spiritually, you stop carrying the story as if it's a wound. It becomes a lesson instead, a lesson in what love should feel like, a lesson in what consistency looks like, a lesson in what you will and won't tolerate moving forward. And with that shift, the pain that once felt sharp begins to soften because it no longer holds power over you. Acceptance also changes the way you view your future. You stop fearing love. You stop predicting that every relationship will turn into the one that hurt you. You stop bracing for disappointment or expecting abandonment. When you delete his energy, you also delete the emotional programming he left behind, the doubts, the insecurities, the overthinking. You start trusting again, not because someone earns it immediately, but because you trust yourself to choose differently next time. You trust your intuition, you trust your boundaries, you trust that you won't abandon yourself to keep someone else. And as you lean into acceptance, something inside you begins to heal that you didn't even realize was wounded, your sense of control. You stop trying to fix what's unfixable or change someone who wasn't willing to grow. You stop trying to rewrite a love story that was never meant to continue. You gain peace from understanding that closure doesn't come from conversations, it comes from clarity. You give yourself permission to move forward without having every answer neatly tied up. The beauty of acceptance is that it lifts the emotional fog. You begin to see your life, your path, and your worth with a clearer perspective. You recognize that someone not loving you the way you needed doesn't diminish the love you have to offer. You stop revisiting parts of yourself that you've already outgrown. And in that newfound clarity, you find something far more valuable than understanding why it happened. You find the strength to walk away from anything that resembles it again. Deleting his energy and choosing acceptance is the moment your past stops being a prison and becomes a stepping stone. It's the moment your pain stops defining you and starts refining you. And it's the moment you finally step into the future that was waiting for you all along. The moment you finally delete his energy, you give yourself permission to step fully into the future you were always meant to have, the one that isn't shaped by who hurt you, doubted you, or took you for granted. It's the moment when your healing stops being about him and starts being about your life, your purpose, your dreams. For so long, you may have moved through your days carrying emotional residue from the past, the heaviness of disappointment, the echo of old memories, the subtle fear of repeating the same pain. And even though you were trying to move forward, a part of you was still walking with one foot in yesterday. But when you remove his shadow from your emotional space, you create an opening for something new to enter. A future that feels lighter, brighter, more aligned with who you are becoming instead of who you were trying to be for him. This is where you start to imagine your life without the limitations that your connection with him quietly created. You begin to see possibilities instead of pain. You rediscover excitement in the little things, a new idea, a new goal, a new experience. You feel yourself wanting more, expecting more, believing in more. The version of you that felt stuck, misunderstood, or unseen begins to fade, and the version of you who is confident, self-assured, and emotionally grounded starts to take center stage. You no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need validation or attention to feel worthy. You don't measure your progress by how much he notices or regrets. Your future becomes about you, your growth, your joy, your unfolding. And as you embrace this next chapter, something remarkable happens. You start making decisions that are driven by clarity rather than attachment. You choose what aligns with your peace. You choose what feels healthy. You choose what nourishes your mind and your heart. Instead of reacting to pain, you start responding to purpose. Instead of chasing love, you allow it to find you in its right form and right timing. You no longer romanticize potential, you prioritize effort, consistency, and emotional safety. You don't repeat the cycles that drained you, not because you're guarded, but because you're wiser. Your standards rise naturally, not out of bitterness, but out of self-awareness. Stepping into the future also means you finally release the fear of being alone. You stop viewing solitude as emptiness and start seeing it as space to grow, space to heal, space to reconnect with your identity outside of anyone else's influence. You learn to enjoy your own presence, to sit with your own thoughts, to celebrate your own progress. That self-connection becomes the foundation for the kind of life you want to build. A life where you're not emotionally dependent on someone's presence, approval, or attention. A life where you don't settle for temporary comfort at the cost of long, long-term peace. And as you walk deeper into this new chapter, you realize that the future you're creating would never have fit the version of you who was still holding onto him. Growth requires space, blessings require space, love requires space, and deleting his energy is what creates that space. It's what clears the emotional pollution so you can actually breathe again, think clearly again, dream boldly again. You're no longer driven by the desire to be chosen. You're driven by the desire to choose well. Your future doesn't need his shadow because shadows blur vision, distort reality, and dim the light you're trying to build. But when you remove that shadow, your path becomes clearer, your heart becomes stronger, your standards become firmer, and your spirit becomes freer. You step forward with a sense of certainty you didn't have before, not certainty about who will walk into your life next, but certainty about who will never have access to your energy again. Because you finally understand that your life is too big, your heart is too valuable, and your future is too important to be shaped by someone who couldn't love you properly. Deleting his energy doesn't close your story, it opens it. It marks the beginning of a chapter where you are no longer surviving pain, but building a life that reflects your healing, your strength, and your worth. In the end, deleting his energy isn't about erasing the past, it's about reclaiming your power, your peace, and your future. When you release what no longer serves you, you create space for growth, clarity, and joy. Your life is too valuable to live in the shadow of someone who didn't appreciate you. Step forward, trust yourself, and embrace the freedom and possibilities that await, because your best chapters are still ahead.